Hey,
Okay, one sec. Um, there we go. Nice. How are you? Take two.
take two. Thank you for being so understanding.
Yeah.
We're all set up. I think we're really good. Not only does it have a little red button that's showing it's recording, it also says recording. So that makes me
Okay,
feel
perfect.
a little better. Um,
I see the recording. I
okay,
think,
cool.
man, I can't tell you how many times that I have done that. And I've done things where I was like, yeah, recording some sort of like training, or like I used to create like online courses for certain things. And so I'd have this whole like elaborate like screen sharing thing that I was doing, and I'd have to do everything just perfect. And I was like, oh, finally got it done. 4 hours of recording later. And then I hit like stop record and the computer freezes. And I'm like, I just closed the laptop. I'm like, not good, man. Not good.
No, not good. I'm sorry you had to go through it yet again, but you know what? Hey, if anything, this gives me a chance to get to know the real Matt a little bit more, which is
Right.
honestly kind of nice. I actually do, I do appreciate. I mean, I was telling you I'd love to get on the phone again, and so I didn't realize it would be this soon.
Like literally 24 hours later.
Literally. Yeah, this is too great. Thanks for, being here again. And
Oh,
again, do you mind just talking about about yourself, where you grew up?
yeah,
Coffee,
yeah,
Moxie,
yeah.
yeah.
Totally. And honestly, not even a big deal. I was just kind of like I had some meetings and stuff, and then yeah, just I had some meetings, and this fit in right in between those meetings. So perfect.
Great. Good timing.
Um, I needed a little break to drink some coffee, have a little granola bar. So we're good.
And talk
Yeah.
about yourself, yeah.
And talk about yes, of course. It always feels good to talk about yourself, right? Um, No, so yeah, I got started in coffee in Chicago. I was a home roaster. I roasted on an old popcorn popper, the old like vintage popcorn poppers from back in the day that you'd plug in and they blow air and swirl the kernels around. Um and I found those through a company called Sweet Maria's, and there was this kind of like
Yeah.
online community of people who were like really nerdy folks, myself included, who
Yeah.
were like,
Yeah.
basically ripping the wires off of them, putting like light switches and dimmer switches so they could control the heat on them, like all kinds of stuff. And so I just got really into it, and I was always fascinated by like creating the perfect roast. Um,
Yeah.
and kind of getting the most balance out of each roast that I was doing. It's just funny now to look back. I have old photos that are like, just super dark roasted stuff. And I really thought I nailed it. And it was just like, oh boy. Not great. There was one time where I set off some smoke alarms we had a 19-story dorm room in Chicago that I was living in. And yeah, definitely set off some smoke alarms, and
hmm
it's an interesting setup. But anyway, yeah, so I got a little espresso machine in my dorm room, started making like coffee drinks. I graduated from Folgers to like iced lattes to then eventually got into like just drinking espresso um and just drinking like mostly pour overs and stuff. So fast forward, moved from Chicago to Denver. I got a random chance to go on a coffee trip to Honduras with a coffee roaster. Just as a customer, actually, they allowed you to pay $1,000, fly with them to Honduras, spend the week there, and that was where I think I really was like, wow, this would be kind of a cool career path. Like this would be kind of a sweet thing to just do for my life.
Yeah.
And moved to Denver, got a job as a barista. I kind of
Mhm.
moved up from there into like the general manager role of that shop. Got a job as a roaster then at a different shop. and then got another job at a different roastery. They ended up opening a location here in Phoenix, and that's how I moved to Phoenix.
Well,
So uh, they helped us move down here. I helped them open that roastery. It was kind of a good progression there. That was 7 years ago.
yeah.
Then yeah, I worked there for a few years. I've done a little bit of like marketing and advertising consulting stuff.
Mm.
Helped like local businesses run ads like gyms and trampoline parks and stuff in Phoenix. And then
Oh.
um, opened Moxie in 2021. So we're about 2.5 years in. We didn't really start as like a cart or a trailer. We didn't really go that route. I had worked so many hours in coffee doing everything from barista to green buying to cold brew production to
Mm.
roasting, cupping, QC, like
Yeah.
everything. And at that point, it was just kind of like there wasn't much more for me to learn about the business model. It was
Mm.
like I've literally done every single detail of all of this, so let's just start a shop and open. Yeah, and so we opened 2021. That was during COVID, but by that point, um, COVID was still a thing for sure, but
Yeah.
people were graduating to like, I can't stay in my house much longer. I need to get out of my house. And I need to be around people. And so, yeah, a lot of people are like, wow, that must have been really hard. It was confusing. It was sort of like, what, I don't know what to do exactly. What are other people doing? Like, I think people who were open before 2020, um, they it was a little easier because everybody kind of went through the whole experience as a business owner together, but opening afterwards was kind of like, yeah, I don't know what that was like in 2020. I wasn't open. And
Mm.
so it was just a little different, but yeah, we opened fine. Business has been good, and I think
Yeah.
one of the cool pieces for me has been like just seeing the overall Phoenix Valley community, like from day one, really, they've received Moxie really well. And
Mm.
in some cities where somebody's like maybe not a Phoenix born native, or they, maybe didn't start by doing farmers markets or doing smaller events or stuff and kind of be more homegrown.
Yeah.
I've seen in some cities where people are sort of casted out or kind of like pushed to the side or like, like you're not one of us. And I haven't really got that energy from Phoenix. Phoenix has been really like welcoming and open arms. And so, yeah, I think that's a cool thing about Phoenix that
Mm.
generally, especially when businesses have a good staff and um, people who are kind and they serve good stuff, like they're quick to recognize it and embrace that. So that's been cool. And here we are today, 2.5 years later. Still don't know what the heck I'm doing with this coffee business, but we're having fun with it, and I'm kind of learning to enjoy the process more than some outcome in 5 years, or like where are we going to be in 10 years. Just sort of more like living today of like, what do I want to do,
Mm.
which really has led us to this actually. So where we are today and this whole conversation is like, it's really centered around um my real love for coffee, and especially sourcing some of these more rare coffees that we'll talk about, is like, it's for me, it's a way to keep coffee interesting. I've consumed so many washed Guatemalan and washed Colombian coffees for I don't know, 20 years that like they're not boring, but it is kind of like, this is coffee. Yeah. Um, and I want the industry like to experience something new. Because I like that experience. And that's like the whole brand of Moxie is uncommon experiences. And so part of my sourcing and why I go out and find weird, random, cool coffees is just because it keeps things fresh and interesting for me. And so as I go on that journey myself, it's fun that other people want to do that with me. That's been a really cool thing.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, there's so many little things that you've already said that I'm already interested in. To begin with, y- you know, it sounds like you grew up in Chicago, right? Am I right in saying that?
Yeah. I
Okay.
mean, I grew up in South Dakota.
Oh.
Uh, but yeah, then I did college and met my wife in Chicago.
Okay, okay. So, two things just with you kind of chatting about that is it's just wild to hear you come from truly such a cold climate to such a warm climate. Like I really don't know what that's like and you saying that the community's been just so welcoming. Like, I mean, was that almost like very different from going to Chicago or just like, because it sounded like it was such a big difference for you. Yeah.
Yeah, well, I think Phoenix being the fifth largest city in the world or in the United States, it doesn't really feel that way. It's
Huh.
a very spread out city. And so the valley itself, which is made up of like Phoenix, Tempe, Scottsdale, Chandler, Gilbert, Peoria, Glendale. Like there's a lot of like actual kind of mini cities inside of Phoenix larger. And
Mm.
so Phoenix, Central Phoenix, downtown Phoenix, it actually is, it feels very small. It's like it has a sense of like a small town feel, which in a way to me is like there's interesting elements from like a business standpoint there of like I think of Chicago and I think sort of like I know businesses in Chicago that like people that I know in Chicago, I've lived there for 5 or 10 years, have literally never heard of. They're like, where is that? I'm like, it's on Milwaukee. And they're like, how have I never heard of that? And I'm like, I don't know.
Huh.
It's been for 12 years. And so there's it's just bigger, it's larger, and I think there's more businesses generally. And so to me as like a business owner in that setting, I feel like you can get away with more maybe or like, you know,
Mhm.
it's a bigger city feel to it. Businesses come and go a lot faster, right?
Yeah.
You might just move in from another city and just kind of start a business and just boom, here we are, we're going. Like, I don't, who owns that? I don't know. In Phoenix, it's very different. Like people in a good way really care about like who owns the business, how do they treat their people, like, and that kind of stuff really goes around, especially in the industry. And so there's, I feel like in a very good way, there's a sense of accountability from business owners about like you have to treat your people well. If you don't care about your people, like everybody's gonna know that really quickly, and they're not gonna boycott you. But a lot of people are just gonna be like, yeah, I'm kind of out on them. And so and it's yeah,
Yeah.
I think for some people that can be intimidating or put a lot of pressure, but I think that level of pressure is a responsibility for a
Mhm.
business owner. So I think it's good and healthy.
Yeah, yeah. Recently, me and Aaron, our bakery lead here, we're just kind of talking about just how important customer service is and, interacting with customers who are both good and bad and kind of what that's been like for us, in St. Louis and as opposed to different cities because we've both worked in coffee shops in different cities. But yeah, no, that's really interesting that you say Phoenix has really been a place where even though it is a large city, it doesn't particularly feel like that. And therefore you kind of get a smaller feel with that hospitality that you're able to provide and people coming in from all over the world to Phoenix is just I don't know, you have a unique opportunity in a wonderful city. And so it's cool just to simply hear you really grab a hold of that. And so the second thing that, kind of stood out to me when you started chatting is, not only are you someone who you got a roaster from Sweet Maria's, which is just, awesome and hilarious listening to that. It's been a while since I've heard anyone say that, to be honest. But you're a part of this online community and you're really getting nerdy. You're really getting nerdy with it. Like, just from the very beginning. And so to imagine where you are now is, to be honest, kind of it must be insane. Yeah, just talk to me a little bit more of just like, I don't know, you like what was it that you're like, man, like I do want to try something different, or like the temperature, what? Yeah, just I don't know, just talk to me about that.
Yeah, I don't know. I just dove head. I don't know what I mean. Part of it is I border on ADHD, and so I that type of personality when they're I'm easily distracted, kind of like squirrel brain, like, oh my gosh, what's new thing, hot. But then when I find something that I'm very, very interested in, I usually hyper focus on it. So I'm like really, really locked in. So like a good example is once I started to get into coffee a little bit more, and I started to even just my first barista role, I went to Sweet Maria's used to have a glossary. Well, they used to have a whole library on their website, and maybe they still do, of like how to roast certain coffees from certain origins. And then also like a coffee glossary. So I was like brand new to coffee, and I was like seeing all these words, and I was like, I don't know what any of this means. And so I just remember being on flights, like going back home for Christmas from college and stuff, and like I would just sit on the airplane and just read like the coffee glossaries and try to soak in as much information as I can, and just like I was just a self learner and would get really, really wrapped into things. And I think that yeah, and then as like my coffee career progressed a little bit, I got a job as a barista, got a job as a roaster. I've always had like also very like upward motion in terms of like the moment I feel like I don't have any more info to consume, next thing. So like as soon as I got a job as a barista, and the guy who was helping consult that shop, he kind of gave me all the things on like keeping pars and how to calculate unit costs, and like really how to dial in a shop to um, make a profit, and not just, constantly be losing money every month. And so and he now has like 150 franchise locations. He's done really well, and I was lucky enough to just get hired and learn from him, so there's been a lot of luck. But along the way, I think, that happened. So that really, really like taught me the retail end of things, the management of things. Um, and then the next piece was roasting, where I got to kind of experiment with a lot of things. And at Corvus, we cupped 20 to 30 coffees almost every week. And so it was just tons of samples all over the world, every kind of fermentation, weird stuff. So that really like built my palate a bit. And then at Coda, which is also a roastery in Denver, a little bit bigger, um, that was doing probably like 2 million pounds of just production roasts. And that taught me more of like the consistency, and informed me more on like how a consumer and wholesale business is run from like a local roaster. And so all of those elements combined into like me getting a look into how to roast coffee properly, how to do it consistently, but then also like I think the big thing for me was between Corvus, my home roasting, and Coda, I saw all ends of the spectrum, and I saw the complaints on multiple ends. So I saw the complaints from like specialty coffee about how the coffee wasn't bright enough or fruity enough. I saw the complaints on the consumer end, or maybe like second tier cafe, of like, hey, this coffee is so funky and floral. I don't even know what to do with it. Like, can you roast it a little more? And what I started to learn is like where there lies a bit of balance for the 90% consumer. And then where some of the more eccentric, like wow stuff lies for maybe the higher end, not the higher end, but like somebody who is looking for something a bit more dynamic and maybe experimental in their coffee. And so when I'm choosing a menu and when I'm finding different coffees to buy, like I have a lot of people, they're not actual people, but like a lot of people in my mind as I'm selecting coffees. And I think that that's part of like, I don't know. I like to think that that's like part of the appeal of Moxie as a roaster, is just that like generally you're going to find all the coffees we buy are really high quality coffees. and we try to source them as best as we can from transparency and sustainability standpoint, as much as the supply chain allows. Um, but also like I think that there's a balance there. And I think across the board in coffee roasting, sourcing, and then like even brewing, and then the specialty or seasonal drinks we serve in our cafe, like that's a theme that we put through all of our stuff, is just balance.
Hmm.
And I like that in cocktails. I like that in spirits. I like that in food.
Hmm.
So I think like across the board, like things that I consume, I like to have complexity for sure, and be really dynamic, but also have a bit of balance.
Mhm.
And I think that in some like more dark roasted stuff, and then also in some like super Nordic style stuff, that I've had from lots of roasters, I found a lack of balance. And I've also heard from consumers how that's frustrating to them. And so I'm definitely still learning and growing, but I think that that's one thing that really drives like my style and Moxie's style of coffee.
No, I think that's absolutely fantastic. And the idea of balancing your coffee in terms not only, like you said, in all aspects of the industry, how you brew, specialty drinks, but the coffee itself, I think, is now becoming of higher importance to me the longer I'm in the industry. I recently had a conversation with Charlie Chuvli, at the QC director at Momos in Korea, and he was kind of just basically saying the same thing in regards to that's what they try to do throughout each process. And it's getting to the point where he's like, we don't want there to be too much bitterness or too much acidity. You want to combine it all very well. So it's really neat when, during conversations like these, I'm hearing everyone else say it. Everyone's trying to get that good balance, which is super encouraging to hear, as well as, just within the brewing process, knowing you've got acidity in the front and you've got bitterness in the back, you want to really just kind of put them together, well. And so that's just, I don't know, I really appreciate it when either balance and or sweetness are really kind of the focal points personally of coffee. That's something I think us at Comet actually really appreciate. And I think we've really come around to wanting those two things more than pungent coffees or like I don't even know what else to say, but like it's just those kind of coffees are now where any one of our baristas who tastes it, at least right now, our current staff, we're like, wow, this is good because we can taste it all and or it's put together. And so it's actually kind of really neat to be able to have your coffees and to be tasting them. Actually, I just finished drinking the Ethiopia Dambia Udu or Udo or whatever, and just like I actually think we're very well balanced. And coming to the end is just really juicy. And I think one of my favorite things about coffee is it's a good cup when it's good from hot to cold. And oddly enough, I liked it whenever, like, the more it cooled, the more I was like, yeah, let's go. So that's just like a random fact. But anyway, that's
Totally.
just to say, yeah, no, we love your coffees and your mission and your idea of balancing is something that we actually resonate a lot with, and so that's actually really cool to hear. And yeah, all the above. Well, I actually have a lot more questions for you, but let's at least talk about these coffees. I'm sure people would like to hear some stuff about them. And yeah, since I just finished the Ethiopia, yeah, walk us through, kind of just I don't know how you got a hold of this Ethiopia, and yeah, what your thoughts on it are. Yeah.
Yeah. That's a funny thing because I was talking about Sweet Maria's, and Sweet Maria's has so basically how their business works is they have Coffee Shrub, which is a company that does all their wholesaling. And so they'll buy coffees in bulk as they export them directly from origin. So Tom, their owner, founder, travels and goes to Ethiopia and sources a bunch of coffees. They get them shipped to their warehouse in Oakland. I think it's Emeryville. And then as people order them like wholesale, like me, a big roaster, not a big roaster, but a roaster, who buys, in 50-pound bags or 132-pound bags. Um, uh, they'll ship them to us, and then basically in that same warehouse they have Sweet Maria's who's selling, they'll break bags down into 1-pound bags and sell them to home roasters.
Mm.
So it's just funny, like kind of full circle, in that this Dambi Udo is from Guji, and yeah, well, I sourced that through Coffee Shrub, and so here I am 14 years later, still buying coffees from Sweet Maria's. um but it's interesting to me, and the reason that I do that is because I've been to their location. I'm now friends with a few of the people in their company, and
Mm.
I know their sourcing practices in terms of finding farm gate pricing and making sure that the coffees they bring in, they do a lot of that work on the front end for a roaster of making sure that farmers are paid properly. There's real clear transparency about who's getting paid what. And so as much as I would love to be a full-time coffee importer, I'm not. And so having some partners who can help you with that process that you trust is really big. So basically, I don't buy a lot of coffees from them, but they do African coffees really well. And so usually around the end of the year, start of the new year, if I kind of forecast and look at what we've got in terms of like Kenya, Ethiopia, Rwanda, and if I'm in need of a little bit, then I'll go there and I just refresh every day. And, eventually there's like a couple good ones that'll come up, and this one came up. So, and then from there, fitting into like our flavor profiles of what we're looking for, it's been a long time since we've had a really berry forward natural from Ethiopia. And I hear from like our customers, our staff, like, man, it'd be great to have like a Guji come in. So this one came in, and like all the notes were like blueberry, blackberry, maybe a little like raspberry jam, and I was like, well, this is just a slam dunk. So um the nice part is like they put some of their like cupping notes, and they put a lot of different things into their listing that helps me be like, I know how they taste their coffees, I know how they score their coffees, and so I can make my adjustments in my head of like, okay, I think this is what this is going to come out like. And yeah, so it just turned out really well. And this is a coffee that when I roast it, I notice like almost no defects in the roast as it comes out of it goes into the cooling tray. Like as it spins in the cooling tray in front of me, there's some Ethiopian coffees that are naturals that will have lots of defects. And basically they're little Quakers that don't roast quite right. And so they stay kind of like a yellow, really light brown color. And just as a side note for anybody who's a little experiment you can do with those, if you ever have a Quaker or like a really light bean that didn't get roasted properly, you can take your thumb and press it on like a countertop or a table or something. If you smell it, it smells like burnt popcorn, or it smells like peanuts. And so in a natural Ethiopia where we're looking for like really clean berry, raspberry, blackberry, blueberry, if we want some sort of that like medley of flavors, having multiple of those defects in that batch is going to be, it's going to taint or sort of give that a weird, maybe underripe berry kind of feel, as
Mhm.
where what we're really looking for is just a fully ripe, juicy berry. That's the note we're going for. And so anyway, on the roasts of this, as we've been roasting it and tasting it, it's been awesome to see that there's almost no defects in it, because it's just it speaks to the really good processing at this mill, and then it also really speaks to the clarity of flavor that comes out in it. So
Mhm. Yeah,
this
I love
I
it.
this one in particular is beginning to taste much clearer to us around 3 to 4 weeks off of roast.
Wonderful. Yeah, I brewed this on the Commandante. I did 20 clicks this morning, and being an approachable coffee, kind of actually I don't even remember if I've explained this to you, but so in our cafe, how we do pour overs is we kind of have two sections of pour overs. One is approachable, and the other's like exotic, and this was kind of our way of we still have customers who come in who want to put milk and sugar in our coffees. And so it was our way of saying, if you want to do these approachable ones, and they're not as expensive, they're not as just kind of crazy and or more fun or funky, whatever adjective you kind of want to put in front of it.
Yeah.
And so for this kind of being, one of those that we would probably say, is approachable, this is still so juicy. It really is. And it's so clean and it's just such an enjoyable one. And so, I'll send this out to all my subscribers, but in case they're, watching right now, how we do our approachables is 22 grams in and we do 330 grams out. And we start with, a 66-gram pour, and kind of from then on out, what we do is we simply allow the bed to just fall and kind of just whatever the coffee kind of wants and needs. We just kind of let it speak for itself. You can use a timer, and we do typically to see where it's at all times, but it's never a huge indication to an extent of if it's doing good or bad, unless it's like 30 seconds or a minute off, is really kind of what because we taste it at least once or twice a week each coffee on our menu. And so this one, 20 clicks, we did a 66-gram bloom. And then from then on out, we kind of divide those three. We divide the last amount of grams into three pours. And so, we go up to 154, 142, and then 330. And each time we're just kind of letting that bed fall. And this one came out really nice at like 410, and, this is me brewing on the Hario. And it was so nice to get a little bit faster of a pour or a pull, just on it as a whole, and it's still so juicy. It's still like once it's cooling down, I like it was one of those brews where when it's hot, I'm just kind of like letting it sit for a second, but then right as it's starting to get lukewarm, I'm all of a sudden chugging it, and
Yeah.
um
Yep.
I think you can even tell if you go back and watch this. Because like I'm just sipping on it when we first start our call, and then all of a sudden I'm drinking a lot of it. Yeah, so that's just to say, that's kind of how we poured it, or I did this morning, and it just came out absolutely fantastic. And so yeah, going back to what you said, as a natural, remarkable. You roasted it so well. The processing at the farm must have been amazing, like you said, because it really is just it's clean, it's balanced, and it's such a fun one to drink. Like man, I'm happy to be drinking it, and I am very sad to have it gone already.
Yeah,
But
it's kind of
yeah.
funny that you said it's kind of funny that you said that progression happened, because when we've been cupping it, sometimes we'll start sipping around like 12 or 13 minutes when it's still pretty hot. And we've been talking about pushing that back a little later, but the first two sips that I've had of this coffee while really piping hot, I've kind of been like, oh, I'm not sure I like this.
Mhm.
And then right at like at least in cupping, around like 15, 16 minutes, everything I didn't like is kind of gone. And then I find myself like I keep coming back to the cup, and I'm like, wow, this is so much fruit, so much fruit, so much fruit. This is crazy. So
Yeah.
yeah, I kind of had the same thing.
I love it. That's too funny. Yeah. Well, so going on from there to the other approachable coffee that we have that I think we got a lot more of too is this amazing Guatemala that you got, um, called La Bonita, and it's a washed Guatemala. So, yeah, again, just let talk us through kind of just how you found this coffee and about Wendy. Yeah, and just what are your recommendations for brewing and your thoughts on the coffee as a whole?
Yeah. Typically, so like Brewing Rex, we would do something similar. Like on the, we basically break ours down pretty simply. Like some naturals will do basically just like 10 grams less of water. So
Mhm.
almost all of our pour overs, we start at a place of 350 grams water, 22 grams coffee, which is like just under a 1 to 16 ratio. And uh but we're also doing our pour overs on Marco. So the way that they shoot water down into the coffee bed is a little different, and the pulses are a little different than maybe a manual brew. Um, but for naturals, we'll usually do about 340. And so we go down to like a 15.5 1 to 15.5 for a natural, or in some cases 15, but usually 15.5. And that just depends on just depends on if we think it tastes better. But usually in a natural, like sometimes we're trying to pull out a little more jammy kind of thing, and so a
Mm.
little less water will give us a bit more acidity and a bit more sweetness. So yeah, on this one in particular, we're doing a 22-gram dose, 350-gram of water, and basically what you said in your Ethiopian kind of process that you do, we do exactly the same. I think ours might vary by like, I don't know, 10 or 15 grams on like each pour, right? So
Yeah.
it's essentially the exact same pour. Um, and so, yeah, this coffee comes from Wewe Tenango. Wewe Tenango's, that's in Guatemala. Wewe Tenango's pretty well known for having like a very chocolatey, kind of full-bodied, slightly cherry flavor profile to it.
Mhm.
Um, it's one of the more popular growing regions in Guatemala. And for whatever reason, I don't know. I just have always really liked coffees from this region. I've always felt like they're kind of balanced. They feel complex to me. Although I think that in some cases, people with Guatemalan coffees, specifically roasters, sometimes with these coffees, tend to either under roast them or not roast them for a long enough period of time. And so, like at Corvus, when we were roasting these, we always had issues with green pepper notes in our Guatemalan coffees. And we had to extend basically the length of our roast. We weren't roasting it darker, just kind of extending it slightly to increase the sweetness a bit and just allow some of that moisture to get out. And so what I really love about this coffee, it comes from a co-op called Kodech. I'll try to keep this part short, but it comes from a co-op called Kodech, which is in Huehuetenango. It's on the western side of Guatemala, and I first traveled there in 2017. I've been buying coffees from them for about a decade, and it's a really high quality co-op. It's a co-op that values transparency. It really values equality in terms of like gender, and they're really trying to get more women involved in their cooperative. And even just the way that they've begun, and to just be like really frank, like it's not that common in their culture to promote women into like prominent leadership positions historically and traditionally, and the men there have really made that a priority for themselves. And that's just been cool to see in terms of like just the like even the difference from 2017 to this last year when I came 2023, like just the culture there felt like a bit more diverse in that way, and it's a result of initiatives that they've put in place, and then also like initiatives that roasters and importers have said like, hey, this would be really good for your co-op, and they've been able to take that feedback and implement it. And so not in a sort of, and not in like a we're trying to change things here way, but just more in like a, hey, this will overall kind of help the coffee community here in this region. It'll help get more women involved. It'll help their economic status, their basically their quality of life, because they have this land, they have the ability to do it, but they're not part of a co-op or something that can teach them how to do it. So it's made it more approachable for people in that region to become part of the co-op and learn how to grow coffee and stuff. So it sort of culminates in April of this last year. I was there, and every year we do basically a cupping competition between the 500-ish participants who are in this co-op. And so the way it works is if people have it basically, if their lot of coffee, they feel like it did really well this year, they had a good crop, they had a good harvest, they'll submit it there. They have one person who's kind of the head of the roasting, who does all the sample roasting there. He literally sample roasts every sample that gets into him,
Mhm.
and he'll cup it and basically be like, this is in or it's out. And if it's out, they have community blends that work better for, let's say, bigger accounts like Counterculture or things like that, Blue Bottle.
Yeah.
Places where they need bigger lots, and so they have to go community lot because they can't buy a 5 bag micro lot
Right.
and 30 days in one cafe.
Mhm.
Um, so that's where that coffee is then going, and they have a price minimum and guarantee on that. So it's a great setup that way for them. For those that do make it into the competition, we cup and score like 80 to 100 coffees. And yeah, this year, this coffee was the winner, the first place winner of all of these coffees in this co-op.
Yeah.
The cool part about it is it comes from Wendy Hernandez. She's about, I'm short, I'm 5'6". She's about 4'10", and
Oh.
she's tiny. And I'm wondering, actually, let me see if I can pull this open real quick. I
Yeah.
was just gonna actually show you a photo of her because I
Yeah.
have one right here. And yeah, she's a tiny little lady, but I don't know if you know, like, I don't know if you'll get what I mean here, but she's the kind of person who, when you get around them, like if I'm having a conversation with somebody sitting next to me, the way that they talk and their mannerisms, and when you ask them a question, they kind of light up,
Yeah.
because they love what they do and they're really excited about it. She's that type of a person, and so it was fun to see that come out. But let's see, can you see this okay?
I can actually. Yeah.
So I'm just pulling this from our Instagram. This is Wendy here.
Mhm.
When we went and visited her farm. So we do all of the cupping, and then
Mhm.
the top place winners will do kind of a ceremony celebration, and we'll go visit her farm.
Mhm.
Um, so later this year, this gentleman on the left, Rosalio, we also have his coffee, which is second place. Um, called Kesna. And personally, I loved Wendy's coffee. It scored really
Yeah.
high for me. His
Yeah.
coffee scored better for me. So I'm
Yeah.
really excited about his coffee as well. Um,
Yeah.
but anyway, yeah, her farm is beautiful. It's on 2 hectares. It's one of the more scenic coffee farms I've ever been to. She's very, very careful about planting other types of trees
Mhm.
uh, alongside of her coffee crops. You can see these big leaf trees that she's
Yeah.
planting for shade.
Mhm.
One thing that I learned while I was there is they have underground varmints, sort of like rats, but like kind of bigger. They're basically, they crawl underground and they eat the roots of those plants. And so she's had a really hard time growing shade plants because these freaking animals and rodents keep eating all of them. But
Yeah.
um, she her dad passed away a couple years ago. Short story is, her dad passed away a couple years ago. She has siblings, but her dad never taught them at all while they were growing up how to grow or produce coffee. And
Mhm.
so when he passed away, she inherited the land, and she has siblings that kind of help farm just during harvest and things like that. But day to day, who's out there walking the land, planting the things, making sure that the trees are stumped properly? That's Wendy. And
Mm.
so um, and even just down to the detail of how exactly she spaces all of her different plants that she has around her coffees and how she does
Mhm.
that,
Yeah.
it's just so detailed and meticulous. So it was cool to see somebody who, she took over this farm, she joined this co-op because of, some of the initiatives that they had made to make it more approachable for women to join the co-op
Mhm.
and to learn how to grow coffee. A couple of the guys there who are agronomists, they work, they're biologists. They focus on how to grow coffee for, like, from a science perspective. Really spent a lot of time with her and said, "Hey, we can teach you and show you how to do this. When you harvest your coffee, we'll help you export it. We'll make sure you get paid fairly." And it's cool that after a couple years of doing that, um, she's a first place winner with one of the more dynamic coffees I've ever had out of Guatemala. Honestly, I could put this
Mhm.
up against a lot of the coffees we have on our menu.
Mhm.
It is super approachable, but the layers of complexity, I think, in this coffee that come out, we get some of our coffees from different importers, and one of the importers who works really closely with Kodach, they had a team member out to our cafe, and she said, she tasted this coffee, and she was just like, look, I've had a lot of coffees from Kodach and a ton of coffees from Guatemala. And this coffee, she's like, you need to submit this to like Good Food Awards or something, because there's so many layers of complexity inside of just this basic washed coffee from Guatemala that shouldn't, none of this stuff should be there, but it is.
Oh.
It's tea like, it's delicate, it's a little citrusy, it's really sweet.
Mhm. Mhm.
So anyway, I just thought, for me, I've been in coffee for so long and I've done this coffee thing. Hang on one sec, my computer is gonna die.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, I was just saying that, like, for having been in coffee for so long, for so many years, like it's really refreshing in the midst of like all the funky stuff and crazy geishas, um, to sort of just be like, it was almost like a slap across my face, like, hey, check this out. It was like, oh man, there's a lot of complexity to be unlocked in these just
Yeah.
very seemingly basic coffees. So this
Yeah.
was this was not just a cool coffee that tastes really great, but um my goal from opening Moxie until now was to find what I call producers with Moxie. And like yes, I want to, and similarly, like partners with Moxie, like people who are willing to tell the stories, who are willing to source coffees that are crazy and unique, but also just like it's really fun to work with people who take a lot of pride in their work and find some meaning and purpose in that, because we spend a lot of our day working, we spend a lot of our time working, and so when work becomes something that people I find when work becomes something that excites me, people enjoy me more and I enjoy myself and my life more. And so um going to a place like Guatemala and experiencing that with a person like Wendy really like put in perspective a lot of the work that I do. And, you know, it's really cheesy and cliche, but like you go from, or I went from sort of like, okay, here I am traveling, I'm exhausted, to like, wow, I'm pretty lucky to have discovered this coffee, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. No, you're absolutely correct about this coffee. It's one of those where, you know, the same thing. We've tasted Guatemala's, they're good. But this one was a little different. And it was really fun. The first brew I did was I did it a little bit coarser. And I mean, right off the bat, you get some, tree nuts of some sort, and yeah, you might get some pear, but then out of nowhere, it starts to be like, oh, like there's a filling mouthfeel, that kind of fills it. And there's like, oh, like almost like a juicy apple, like Envy or Fuji. And then on the end, you're like, wow, there's some florals there. And maybe even like a grapefruit on the end. And it's just like, wow, like we've actually kind of gone around now, and there's a lot going on with this. And, I brewed it one or two more times. I don't remember how many, but, doing it again, like finer, coarser, really just kind of shaped it in different ways, which was really neat to see.
Yep.
And so, you talking about Wendy, it sounds like, because this is a coffee it's a Caturra and it's a Bourbon, which, they're used a lot, you've mentioned, and we see it all the time, especially in the Americas, obviously. Um, it, do you really think that this is truly just Wendy, just like harvesting this and farming these varieties just so well that that's why these are just they're a little bit more fun, like what, or yeah, like yeah, what's your kind of just overall like, man, this is why this is probably so good, you know?
Yeah. I think what I was surprised by, I mean, there's um I think that there, for as much in America as we're learning about experimental fermentation and extended fermentations and things like that, even like co-fermentations, people adding fruit and stuff. Like if you go to like this co-op in Guatemala, like there's maybe 1% or less of producers there have even heard of doing anything like that.
Huh.
And so and even like the leaders of the co-op, I was kind of like just chatting with them about like, hey, have you ever thought like maybe like just trying out an anaerobic like thing? And there's like, what do you mean exactly? Like I know what anaerobic is, but like how would we do that with coffee? And I was kind of talking them through that. So we did I have a couple funny photos on my phone, but we actually did an experiment with them this last after the harvest, a couple months later, they had some extra coffee. We did a little anaerobic natural experiment with them that turned out pretty well from Wendy's farm. But just to like, I was like, hey, I'll pay you for the samples. I'll pay you for
Yeah.
everything. If you have a little extra, like, let's try it and just see what happens. Just so you guys can experiment with it and learn. And I I have some theories that I'd like to test out too. And so what I think though, what I learned on this last trip that I maybe had forgotten or wasn't as clear to me is just um there's a part in coffee processing where they pick all of the cherries and they take them to a big tank. And this is where the coffee naturally ferments. So what they do is they use a depulper, either manual or they have a motor on it that basically spins and removes the cherry skin and some of the mucilage. And so what you're left with is this kind of slimy coffee seed, two of them. There's two of them in each cherry. And you're left with a seed that's kind of slimy and still has a layer of parchment around it. And that all goes into a big, huge tank that they fill with water. And the coffee begins to aerobically ferment. And that's how you wash coffee. It basically ferments and eats whatever is left of that mucilage off of the seed. Then you drain the water, you wash it off, and then you dry it. And that's a washed coffee. So for decades and decades, people in Guatemala have been doing this. And they're sort of just the set way that you do it. Some people don't do that floating thing. So when they put it in the tank, they don't before they depulp them, what they'll do is they'll take all the cherries, put them in the tank, fill it with water, and the defective cherries float to the top. So the ones that have lighter density that are defective in some way, maybe they got insect damage or whatever, they'll float to the top. And what Wendy does is she scrapes them off the top and removes them from her micro lot batch. There's different things you can do to pull out defects, but if you do that really well, you're starting at a place of you're going to have pretty low defect count. Not everybody in this co-op does that. And they're trying to get more people to do it, but some people just don't have the infrastructure to do it.
Yeah.
And so, like Wendy had that, she built that out. So she had that capability. She floats her cherries, which is just a starting thing that's like for a lot of the world, that's just basic. You just do that, but not everywhere that is. And then after that, then she'll depulp them, wash them, whatever. And I think the other thing is she's really, really locked into after they're washed, you take the parchment out and you set them out on patio. You can set them on a patio or you can set them out on a raised bed. On a patio, generally, you would say a raised bed is better because it allows for air to go, basically a more even drying process.
Yeah.
That's true in warmer climates. At 1,900 meters above sea level in Guatemala, where they are particularly, it gets really cold at night. And so a raised bed is, in their case, we haven't fully tested this, but in some cases, what they found is that it actually gets the coffee to be too cold and it dries too fast. And
Wow.
so at night they have a cement patio. They have a kind of a mesh tarp that they lay down. And then at night they will roll the coffee basically into a ball in the tarp to
Wow.
maintain its temperature and then bring it back out during the day.
Mm.
Um, just because it
Wow.
gets so cold. So I wanted to push to maybe have raised beds, but it just goes to show, like, unless you're there and know what you're doing, you don't really know what you don't know.
Oh,
So from that perspective, um, there's, and then I guess the last piece is the way that Wendy describes her process of finding out when the coffee is dry is very interesting.
mm,
So a lot of people just they'll hard and fast rule it by whatever 3 days or 5 days, depending on just where they're at in the world and how long it takes. So they set the coffee out on the patio. They have usually rakes that they'll walk through to rotate the coffee. So they'll stir the coffee every couple of hours throughout the day to make sure it's kind of evenly rotated. There's not too much moisture on top or on bottom. And it's like a thin layer of coffee about an inch or 2 inches tall. And so it spreads across the whole patio, and they'll rake it, whatever. And after 3 days, done. What Wendy does is very similar to that, but she stirs it a bit more. And then um, the other thing, as it's getting done, that I haven't really seen done before is, I don't know how scientific this is, but she's started to basically, she'll take kind of two handfuls of coffee, and it's in parchment, and she can kind of like rub it together with her hands, and she kind of like pushes them together. And she can tell both by smell, sight, and sound when it's reached a level that she wants her coffee to. They
mm,
also have tools for this as well, but she just has this kind of like intuitive feeling about where that coffee's at, and then she'll stop it right at the moment when she's like, okay, it's hit. So she has a general timeline, I think about 3 days, but and then um she really listens for that sound of the parchment. It gets kind of this like scraping noise, and that's when she knows, like, okay, the moisture's gone here, and this is right where I want it to be. So there's lots of different scientific elements that you can do. You can measure bricks, you can do lots of different things when you're picking the cherries. She does some of those things, but then there's also this sort of um fanatical kind of, she's very crazy about her coffee, and she's very involved, and it's almost like a part of her that she feels and understands intuitively. That to me is really cool, and I will say not a lot of producers that I've met have done that, or I've never seen that done, but
yeah.
I think it just speaks to the level of like commitment and quality that she has.
Yeah, absolutely. That's definitely saying she really cares about her coffee just a wee bit more than other people. And yeah, again, it's facts like these that when I know these, I'm way more excited to be drinking the coffee that I'm drinking. The fact that she's taking them and being like, all right, like I think we're almost there, and or whatnot. That I don't know, it gives me a better understanding of what the coffee has gone through to get to me and to be tasting. So yeah, Wendy, that is someone that I will definitely want to always keep on my radar. Now, after having tasting this, this coffee, because it is so good and it is one of the better washed Guatemal's I've ever had.
Yep.
So yeah, again, just thank you so much for allowing us to have this coffee. Yeah, we absolutely love it. Well, moving on to these two remarkably fun coffees that we kind of use for like our exotic subscription. They're both by Diego Bermudez. What would you say is kind of how even you got a hold of, I don't know, knowing about Diego, wanting his coffees because we've had the pleasure of having a few and just so tasty. So yeah, kind of how did you happen upon Diego?
I think Manhattan,
Oh
and
wow.
a few other roasters. Um, Mostly, I've just been trying to a big part of even just our initial launch and opening was, and I thought, man, how would we be different? I thought two things. How would we be different than other shops, right? Like there's a lot of other shops people go drink coffee at. And then two is like what kinds of coffees do I enjoy? And like let's just source coffees for me and see if other people enjoy that. So a lot of that is just me. I really love great coffee roasters. I buy a lot of coffee from different people. Like I support a lot of roasters.
Yeah.
Um, and so I'm buying coffees from Say, Manhattan, Junto, you name it, like all
Yeah.
over the place.
Yeah.
Lots of different roasters. And yeah, his coffees I think just stood out to us. We couldn't stop drinking. So we didn't send you Letty Bermudez. We're getting that one back, but we were drinking
Yeah.
Letty Bermudez from Manhattan, I think, and we were just like, this coffee, what is going? This coffee is insane.
Yeah.
And so we started looking into it more. We put the box away, came back to it like 4 months later, drank it again, and we are like, this is still amazing. Like, this is crazy. Um, so we kind of fell in love with them naturally. And then I
Yeah.
reached out to their team and hit them up on Instagram and just like, dude, I haven't had a coffee like this ever. Like, how do we buy your coffees? Like, we'd love
Yeah.
to serve your coffees in our cafe. And so we bought 5 different ones. Um, just across the board, we cupped a lot of them. So we bought a big sample pack just to try all of them, and then we picked a few of our favorites that we thought were interesting.
Mm.
Um, these two, Luna and Lychee, are just interesting in two very different ways. I mean, I think Luna's a more expensive geisha. It costs us a lot more to purchase that green. Uh, and Lychee is a Castillo. Both of them have undergone thermal shock wash processes and kind of unique like fermentation uh, with some yeast. So like I think one of the interesting pieces about, let's start with Luna, is Luna's picked as it's overripe, slightly overripe, and so it accentuates some of those like red fruit notes. And even just that alone, I think is kind of an interesting way to start the coffee process, is to pick overripe cherries. And then
Yeah.
like and then lychee is a Castillo variety, and they started growing in Colombia more Castillo because it's a hardier varietal. It resists plant rust. It resists a lot of just plant disease, and it yields more cherries than geisha. So Luna will only yield probably, I don't know about that specifically. Generally, geisha is going to yield 25 to 50% of the typical cherry amount that a Caturra would, or a
Oh,
Castillo. So you get less cherries. That's part of the reason geisha costs more. And then also the flavor profile itself is really dynamic. And so you're paying a little bit for quality as well. But the Castillo will yield a lot more cherries. So it's great for a farmer because they can sell more cherries. But
yeah.
also, more importantly, well, as important is, I think it doesn't taste as good. And so I think lychee is the future of coffee, basically, because of some of the climate issues and just in some parts of Colombia that I visited, the climate's getting so warm that it's causing some of the plants to not. There's having huge issues with plant disease, and so
Mm.
by planting Castillo, they're able to kind of get around that problem as best they can, and then using really unique processes like in lychee, they juice the cherry and the mucilage and create a yeast and then introduce it to the coffee. So they're using the coffee, kind of byproduct in order to then help enhance or elevate the flavor of this Castillo.
Hmm.
They do it in a way that doesn't feel fake, or it doesn't really give these kind of like fake coffee flavors. it feels genuine to the crop. It feels like it's a unique expression for sure, but it feels like authentic. And so I just think, for the future of growing coffee, we're going to see a lot more Castillo and varieties that are hardier, but maybe don't have quite the brightness and fruit floral stuff that I really love in coffee. And so
Yeah,
if you use these types of processes to help do that, they can charge more. So they can make a better return on their harvest, but also like we can take a Castillo variety and put it on our wild coffee list, which is
yeah,
sick.
yeah, yeah. No, it's wild. And I think starting just with the lychee, I think when we were chatting yesterday, I was saying, and actually let me just look at my notes real quick because I just simply loved how the lychee was so just kind of spot on. My tasting notes the other day, I think I brewed it on 12 clicks on the Commandante, and just right off the bat, I'm getting citrus fruit. I'm getting, fresh lemongrass and red grape with like a very light, transparent mouthfeel, and just like almost juicy red pear, you know what I'm talking about? And it was just like so, I don't know, just so spot on with each note that it was just like this is just too neat, And so, and this was, I think, my first time. I mean, I don't, I've had Diego Bermudez coffees from a couple different roasters, obviously more from Manhattan, but some I don't know if I've had. And so this particular one, this might be my first one of this kind of specific Castillo, and it's so tasty. It's so good, and it's a coffee that kind of hits home in every area for the most part because it's juicy, but it's light, and I was really happy to be drinking it because it was something that, I mean, I've actually recently was chatting with my team about kind of just varieties, like you said, that are a little bit more disease resistant. And to be able to have a Castillo, which, was developed by Colombia to literally do this, to be still a little bit on the better quality, but farmers can actually use it is just too neat to have, and to see Diego just do an amazing job with this is insane. And so, for people sitting home, and I've already gotten a text yesterday from one of the subscribers saying, this is kind of their first time having, thermal shock washed coffees. As much as you can, can you kind of describe the process that the lychee and the Luna kind of went through to kind of get to where it's at? Yeah.
Yeah. I think both of them are a little unique, and I don't understand like, just for full transparency, I don't understand because I haven't seen them in person, the exact like bioreactors that they use for the thermal shock. Um, but I will say, let me see here. I had like a one paragraph note that I keep about that, but I
Hmm.
don't know that I'm gonna be able to find that fast enough.
Hmm.
Um, what I do know is that the thermal shock is done with these bioreactors, and I think all of the rest of what I'm about to say is like take it with a grain of salt, and if I misspeak, I'm sorry.
Oh
I'm
yeah.
trying to do it as best as I can, but having not been to the actual like farm itself, it makes it a little bit tricky. But the thermal shock process is basically to kind of it creates kind of a seal for the flavors. So um here I have my little paragraph.
Yeah. I love it.
Um I think the main difference is with lychee and Luna. Luna's picked a slightly overripe.
Yeah.
Lychee's picked traditionally where the cherries are just like they're perfectly ripe. Um so lychee I know goes under an anaerobic fermentation around like 72 hours, and it's submerged in water. Which that to me alone has been kind of an interesting process. I've seen this at a couple places in Colombia. But yeah, it's Sometimes with anaerobic fermentations in tanks without that, what I found is they don't rotate the barrels enough or the cherries, and you get an
Mm,
uneven there's an uneven bean density. So you get very
okay.
uneven roasts. Um, in this case, I really like it submerged in water. Some people call that a pre-fermentation. But yeah, it's basically just an anaerobic fermentation in water. And I feel like it being in water stabilizes the temperature really well of all the cherries across the board, middle to outside. And it also, because it stabilizes it and usually overnight it gets cooler, the water helps keep that at a more stable temperature throughout the day to all 24 hours.
Okay.
Yeah. So it lends itself to a more even fermentation, which is what I really, again, like balance, evenness.
Yeah.
That's kind of a theme for us. Um, yeah, then basically they pulp it, they demucilage it, remove
Yeah.
the and then they create basically like a culture from it and introduce it to the coffees. I think they do like 24 to 36 hours or something like that with that culture. The thermal shock process is um, uh, yeah, basically the way they describe it is to create sort of a seal on the coffee that lends itself to a better drying process, like a more even drying process. So they dry it in a dehumidifier to remove some of the humidity. And uh, the reason that they like doing that is the thermal shock process and then drying in dehumidifier, that has sort of got a bad rap from like huge commercialization in Brazil, but largely some of the best coffees that I've seen in Colombia were all done on thermal like dehumidifiers. And there's a huge benefit to that in that it allows you the ability to stop the process when you want it without any over fermentation, which is why these coffees taste so clean. They're washed coffees, which makes them for us easier to roast. Some of the naturals you can scorch. These wash processed coffees are a bit more easy to roast, and then also like um, the way that they do that dehumidifying process um, is yeah, they don't over ferment the coffees, which is something that like in tasting all these funky coffees from all over the world, that's something I've been really like not frustrated by, but kind of like, yeah, this is good, but it's a little overdone. Um, so
Yeah.
yeah. Um,
That's fantastic. Yeah.
yeah, and then Luna is basically the same thing. They do they so in lychee, I believe they add the culture to the coffee. In Luna, what they're doing is they're adding the liquid pulp extract to the coffee. So they
Yes.
continue in that initial pre-fermentation in cherry. They remove that, they remove the pulp and the mucilage,
Mhm.
and then the liquid pulp extract that's created, they add to that process and do it for another like 48 hours.
Yeah.
And then the rest of that process after is basically the same. So
Okay. Yeah.
um yeah, so kind of just like weird, like in Luna, trying to accentuate some of like the more like berry fruitedness,
Mhm.
florals. In lychee, it's a bit more like yellow fruits and
Yeah.
um yeah, that. So two
Mhm.
really interesting different processes.
Yeah, yesterday someone texted me who got the Luna, and they were just like, the aroma on this is unbelievable. They were just like, this is just florals and cherry blossom for days. Like, I'm just absolutely amazed by it. And, like I said yesterday, I brewed this up, on 15 clicks, and to be honest, it was perfect. Just didn't want to change anything. And Aaron was also there, and we got to try it together, and we were just like, this is it. This is like we
That's
don't
the
we don't want to do
style.
we don't want to do anything different. Which
Well,
got so lucky, and I think it came out. Actually, let me check. I think around 4 minutes. Yeah, around 4 minutes, and so, found that to just be amazing. Just and it was just like there's some like it was almost as if there were multiple berries in there. It was black tea like there were florals. It was just like, excuse me, it just had a bunch of stuff in it, and it was just too fun. And thankfully, both the Luna and the Lychee, I kind of had the time to, pull some espresso shots on, and both were just absolutely remarkable. And we have only a few people who actually get these coffees for espresso, and for those actually, what would your recommendation for just pulling on espresso would be, either for the Luna Lychee, and or if you also have general recommendations for the La Bonita or the Dambi.
yeah, most of our stuff with our profile, and also like our water in Phoenix is a little unique, but most of our stuff that we do is like in the range of 19 grams in the basket, sometimes 20. With some of these, like if I'm trying to really juice up a coffee, sometimes like something like Luna, you could definitely do a 19 and a half or 20 or something. So maybe whatever that translates to for everybody else, like maybe a slightly larger dose. And then we usually pull somewhere in the range of like 48 to 54 grams out. So we're always doing slightly, just ever so slightly larger yields out.
Hmm.
I'm losing my words. And over the course of like 27 to 32 seconds, sometimes 33 seconds,
Hmm.
just depending again on the coffee. If something's tasting too bright, we might opt for a little bit longer extraction time. If something's or sour, if something's too bitter, we might just try to shorten it up a second or two. But I was just talking with my friend the other day who was pulling lychee at home, and he has always pulled espresso at like 38 to 42 grams, and I was just like, hey, just try it. Just try it. Try like a 48 gram out or a 52 out.
Yeah.
And he said it took him a little while to sort of find the right balance in that range. But he said that he hasn't gone back since then, and he's really enjoyed some bigger doses or bigger yields. Just in the way that it's created some balance in the espresso, less sourness. It's less like oily and heavy, and it's more like kind of silky and creamy. So just a different way to pull it. But all of those coffees, we pull them somewhere in that range. And
Hmm.
I would say the biggest thing that we found is if there's a way that you can wait for 3 or 4 weeks
Yeah.
to pull these things off of roast, I would do that. So at least 3 weeks. But what we've found, particularly with coffees from Guatemala that we love, 4+ weeks, like really 4 to 6 weeks is our golden range, where the coffees themselves are super off gassed, but they've not lost any of their vibrancy, and it's
Yeah.
just easier to pull consistent shots.
Hmm.
And we find the sweetness is just like really nice there.
Yeah, I love it. And I totally agree. Just the couple shots that I got to pull simply of the Luna and the Lychee, I think we ended up going around 45 to 50,
Mhm.
and around, and for us, we're not dialing it in on a Mythos, we're not dialing in on an E80 or anything like that. We're just throwing it in the EK just to kind of see what we can get. But
Mhm.
yeah, anywhere between 45 and like 50 or a little over, and kind of just around 25 to 80 seconds of, yeah, and it really just pulled super well. It's like, I gotta say, the lychee that we pulled was like in your face. It was like, man, am I here? And it was ridiculous. It was like, all right, like this coffee's saying it's here to party, and we got the memo. Um, but yeah, so pulling your coffees on espresso was actually pretty fun. I'm glad that we got the ability to do so.
Nice.
Um, Yeah, so kind of just overall of all these coffees that we got to get from y'all, I'm really, really just super excited that we got them. And probably in October or so is when we kind of started doing a very small trial run of some kind of coffee subscription, and we did it with the roasters that we were currently carrying at the time. And so now that we're in the new year and we're really trying to do some roasters all over the world that we kind of don't have room to carry, it's really exciting because our whole goal is to actually do roasters that we believe in. There's a lot of multi roasters out there that are carrying roasters and coffees that we truly think are good, but not really amazing. They don't stand out, and so it's nice to get coffees from a roaster in the US that like we 100% believe in. That you guys, you say you're trying to get balanced coffees and you're succeeding, and we're tasting it, and it's just too neat to be able to share that with St. Louis. And we have one random person subscribing, in California, and so like even they get to try it and maybe they haven't had Moxie yet. And so that's just like too neat that just randomly, we get to have some absolutely exquisite coffees, super clean, super fun and enjoyable. And having the opportunity just for myself, even just to sit down here at home and brew them at home is the neatest thing to be able to see that wow, like I really believe in this coffee because not only am I in our cafe setting where we're dialing in coffees, we have great equipment or whatnot, but I get to just go home and drink these coffees that we're using for a subscription, and I'm just like, man, I couldn't be happier with this. So to start, this year off with honestly one of the few US roasters that we really believe in, Moxie was just a super fun way. To start it. And I don't know if Trey's talked to you, but we've talked about doing possible things in the future with Moxie. So who's to say? But this is just like too neat that we got to kind of start off with you. Yeah, and so
That's really nice. Thanks for saying that.
yeah, no, I mean it really, like I said the other day, it's roasters like you that I am amazed that to an extent you allow us to serve your coffee because although as a roaster you want you need to make money in
Yeah.
in 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 my mind there is a point in which you understand that you are of high quality and you want other people to be serving your coffee very well and to be representing you well. And so it really is too neat that you allow us to do that. And we're really trying our best out here, with everyone we have. And we're having way too much fun to be honest. Um, but yeah, so real quick, kind of going back to before wrapping things up, I do have a few more just kind of questions. Because again, like I said, you're a roaster we believe in, and so you've been in the industry so long, and so the first question on my mind right now is what are the or not what but who are the professionals in the industry that you Matt, you're like, man, like I'm still learning from these people, and or they're my inspiration because I mean obviously as someone else who's I've only been in the industry probably 6 or 7 years now, but it's changed, it's fluctuated, and in some cases like people like Tetsu Kasuya, like he's still on like my top five people of like, I'm learning from him in terms of how to brew. But yeah, what are the inspirational people for you constantly kind of, as you're in your field? Yeah.
Yeah, I think there's been people that I've looked up to. Weirdly enough, I looked up a lot to Blue Bottle when they were really young, like 2009, 10. Because what I thought that they were doing there was creating a little like just a kind of a different, unique look and approach to coffee that I didn't feel had been done before. And I felt that way about Intelligentsia too. That was, I mean, a long time ago when both of those two were not that big and they were still kind of local to the cities that they had opened up in. And to me felt like, oh, this is a little break from this whole like Starbucks second wave thing. And yeah, so that for me was just kind of my initial like vantage point of like people or founders or things that I looked to. And then current day, I think a lot of the people that I'm looking up to in terms of like I look up more to like roasters, less people and more like roasters and companies that I think are doing cool things. Like I really like Nomad, Manhattan.
Mhm.
I think like Little Wolf presents interesting kind of roasting style that I do like. And I think it's really hard to name like individuals, but I like when people are doing their own unique thing, and whatever that is sort of in spite of or aside from like the status, like kind of what everyone else is doing. Um, like as an example, like there was this phase, nothing against avocado toast. I love avocado toast. I have nothing bad to say about avocado toast, but it was in every cafe, right? At least here, every single cafe. Like if you looked at their little food menu, it's like, yep, we do avocado toast. And there's just a few cafes that like just could do avocado toast, but don't. And they do kind of their own different breakfast or own different like they serve their own stuff and it's unique and it's different. And those are the people I think there's people in the coffee world like that. I probably have more people in the restaurant world or like food world that I look up to, because I think there's more examples that I can kind of connect to. And I like looking into like the restaurant world or like the design world where people it's easier to find clear examples of people really just outside the box. And it helps me be like, oh man, like I'm still just playing around in my little box. Like maybe I should open the lid and look outside and like see what else we could do. So
Yeah. No, I love it. There's so many out there, and glad to have this conversation with you to learn so much. I mean, you said quite a bit of things I actually didn't know, so this is actually really exciting. But yeah, I'll wrap this up by just again saying thank you so much. I'm really excited to hear what everyone else who tries your coffees, what they think, and I'll let you know. And yeah, again, thanks. You guys are the best, and we'll keep in contact for sure.
totally. Thanks for like just letting me rant about all the this is all the stuff that really excites me. Um and it's not like every day I can obviously communicate this to a lot of the people who come into Moxie, but like I don't have an hour to sit down with every one of them, right? And so like
Yeah.
it's really fun for me too. So thanks for making the time.
Absolutely. Thank you again. And we'll chat soon, Matt. Take care.
See you. Bye.
Bye.